In an isolated mansion, the infant heir to a powerful family is on the brink of death, while 9 doctors struggle to save him. However, it's an observant girl with no medical training who discovers the key to his survival. Caught in a web of family deceit, her courage exposes a sinister plot and changes everyone's fate. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We're moving forward. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. The mansion stood imposing in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut, like a monument to success and power. Its high wrought-iron gates protected not only a multi-million-dollar estate, but also secrets that no one dared to mention aloud. Behind the white walls and wide windows, life moved in a calculated silence, where every word was measured and every gesture carried an invisible weight. Lily was 11 years old when she walked through that gate for the first time. Her dark eyes observed everything with curiosity and caution while she held firmly onto the hand of her mother, Constance. The girl came from a modest neighborhood in the Bronx, New York, where the houses were small and the narrow streets overflowed with life and noise. There in Greenwich, the silence was different. It wasn't peace, it was restraint. Constance had secured the job of assistant housekeeper after months of searching. A widow for 3 years, she needed that job like she needed air. The position included housing for her and her daughter, a rare benefit that made her eyes shine with relief when she received the confirmation. Lily noticed the change in her mother's countenance, and although she felt fear of the unknown, she decided to be strong. After all, that was what her mother had always taught her, to be strong, to observe, and to protect those we love. The woman who received them at the service entrance was Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a military posture, she was about 60 years old and had a gaze that seemed to pierce right through people. Her grey hair was pulled back into an impeccable bun, and her navy blue uniform didn't have a single wrinkle out of place. When she spoke, her voice sounded firm and devoid of warmth. "Welcome. I hope you understand that this is a traditional family home. Here we value discretion, efficiency, and above all, respect for the rules. Constance, you will report directly to me. As for the girl, she may move through the service areas, but she must never enter the main rooms without express authorization. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mrs. Higgins, perfectly clear," Constance replied, lightly squeezing Lily's hand. The girl only nodded, but her eyes were already recording every detail. The way Mrs. Higgins crossed her arms, the way her eyebrows furrowed when she looked at Lily, the almost imperceptible tension in her thin lips. There was something about that woman that didn't match the job of caring for a home. She seemed more like someone commanding an invisible army. In the following days, Lily began to meet the other staff members. Richard, the driver, was a middle-aged man, always dressed in a dark suit, with a neutral expression that never changed. His movements were rigid, calculated, as if every step were planned in advance. He didn't smile, he didn't make jokes. He only greeted with a nod and followed his routine with military precision. Lily noticed that he moved through every room in the house, not just the garage. Sometimes she saw him standing in hallways watching, as if he were on guard. Then there was Clara, the nanny for little George, the family's baby. Clara was around 30, with brown hair always tied in a ponytail, and a gentle smile that appeared only when she was away from Mrs. Higgins. In the first few days she was affectionate with Lily. She asked about her previous school, praised her drawings, and offered cookies when she saw her studying in the service kitchen. But soon, that friendliness began to fade. Clara started avoiding Lily's gaze, trembling slightly when she held the baby, and leaving rooms quickly whenever the girl entered. Lily didn't understand what had changed, but she felt that something was wrong. The Sterling family was composed of 3 main members. Robert Sterling, the patriarch, was a successful businessman in the construction industry. Tall, with graying hair and broad shoulders, he had the bearing of someone who had always been in command. His presence filled the rooms, and his deep voice echoed through the hallways when he gave orders over the phone. He traveled constantly for work, spending more time in hotels and offices than at home. When he was present, he treated the staff with distant, almost automatic politeness, like someone fulfilling a social protocol without real involvement. Beatrice, his wife, was a woman of fragile beauty and eyes that were always tired. She must have been about 40, but she seemed to carry the weight of much more. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable, but there was an absence in her gaze that Lily noticed from their first meeting. Beatrice rarely smiled. She spoke little. She spent hours in her room or on the veranda, looking at the garden without really seeing anything. Lily noticed that she took medication every day at fixed times, always administered by Mrs. Higgins, who would enter the room with a silver tray, a glass of water, and 3 differently colored pills. And there was George the baby. Only 6 months old, he was the invisible center of that entire house. His curious blue eyes followed the movements around him. His smile appeared easily when Clara hummed softly. But Lily noticed something strange. Beatrice was never left alone with her son. There was always someone nearby. Mrs. Higgins, Clara, or even Richard circling the vicinity. At first the girl thought it was the excessive care of a nervous mother. Later, she began to suspect it was something else. Surveillance. The weeks passed, and Lily developed a silent routine. She woke up early, helped her mother with light tasks, studied in the afternoon in the small service library, and observed, always observing. Her mother, Constance, worked tirelessly, organizing closets, supervising the cleaning, and assisting Mrs. Higgins with all the house's demands. She seemed happy to have stability, to be able to offer a secure roof to her daughter. Lily smiled at her mother, but inside she carried a growing restlessness. There were conversations that ceased when she entered, glances exchanged between Mrs. Higgins and Richard, the way Clara averted her eyes whenever she held George, and Beatrice, always distant, always medicated, always accompanied. One afternoon, Lily was in the pantry organizing food containers when she heard muffled voices coming from the service kitchen. She immediately recognized the low, tense tone. It was Clara, Richard, and Mrs. Higgins. Instinctively, the girl huddled between the shelves, holding her breath. She knew she shouldn't listen, but something stronger kept her there, motionless. "I can't take it anymore," Clara said, her voice choking up. "This isn't what I agreed to. He's just a baby, Higgins. An innocent baby." "You knew from the beginning what the plan was," Mrs. Higgins replied with cutting coldness. "Don't come to me now with cheap sentimentality. You owe a debt to your uncle's memory just as we do." "But this isn't right. I look at him and I see only a child, not the one responsible, not the guilty one. He has nothing to do with what happened." "It doesn't matter," Richard intervened, his voice low and controlled. "We've already gone too far. There's no turning back. What was decided will be carried out. It's a matter of honor." "Honor?" Clara almost screamed, but she caught herself. "What honor is there in hurting an innocent child?" Silence. Then Mrs. Higgins's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Remember what he did to our own blood. Remember the broken promises. Remember how he destroyed everything without a shred of remorse. This isn't revenge, it's justice. And you will fulfill your part, Clara. Do not disappoint me." Lily felt her heart race. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the shelf. What did that mean? What plan was that? And who was the he Mrs. Higgins mentioned? Robert? George? She waited until she heard the footsteps fade away. Only then did she leave the pantry, her legs shaky and her mind in a whirlwind. She needed to tell someone, but who? Her mother was so happy with the job. What if Lily told her something and wasn't taken seriously? What if they lost everything because of an unfounded suspicion? She decided to observe more, to wait, to gather information before acting. In the days that followed, Lily intensified her discreet surveillance. She noticed that Beatrice took her medicine earlier and earlier, that Clara avoided being alone with George, always calling someone to accompany her, that Richard moved through the house like a ghost, always present, always attentive, and that Mrs. Higgins controlled absolutely everything, from meal times to who could enter or leave certain rooms. One night, Lily woke up thirsty. She crept down to the kitchen, trying not to make a noise. As she approached, she heard voices again, this time only 2, Richard and Mrs. Higgins. "Everything is set for next week. He's traveling again. It will be the ideal moment. And the wife. Beatrice will be asleep. I've already adjusted the dosage of the medications. She won't see anything. She won't know anything. And after we leave, as we agreed, each to a different part of the country. No traces, no connections. This has been planned for years, Richard. We cannot fail now. Lily backed away slowly, returning to her room with her heart hammering in her chest. Her suspicions were confirmed. There was a plan involving George, a plan that would be executed when Robert was traveling and Beatrice was incapacitated. That night, Lily could hardly sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking of the blue-eyed baby, his innocent smile, the little marks he made in the air with his small hands. She remembered her own childhood before she lost her father. She remembered a neighbor who almost lost her son because of a wrong diagnosis. She remembered the pain, the despair, the feeling of helplessness. She couldn't let that happen. But how to stop it? She was just a girl. No one would believe her. And if she told her mother, she might put her in danger too. Lily decided she needed to be alert. Very alert. She needed to find out more details, understand exactly what they planned to do, and find a way to protect George without exposing her mother. The days passed in growing tension. Lily watched every movement, every conversation, every look. And the more she saw, the more convinced she became that something terrible was about to happen. Robert announced that he would be traveling the following week to a major construction site in Washington, D.C. He would be away for at least 5 days. Beatrice nodded mechanically, showing no emotion. Mrs. Higgins smiled discreetly. Clara lowered her eyes. Richard remained impassive. Lily felt a shiver run down her spine. The countdown had begun. That night, while helping her mother fold towels in the laundry room, Lily almost told her everything. The words reached the tip of her tongue, but she swallowed them back. She couldn't risk it. Not yet. Constance noticed her daughter's distant look and stroked her hair affectionately. "Is everything okay, sweetheart? You've been so quiet." "I'm fine, Mum. Just thinking about the new school." Constance smiled, relieved. "You'll adapt. You've always been smart. Smarter than I ever was." Lily hugged her mother, smelling the comforting scent of laundry detergent and lavender. She wanted to protect her, to protect George, to protect herself. But how? The next morning, Lily saw Beatrice take her medicine as usual. Mrs. Higgins stood by her side, waiting for her to swallow every pill. Afterward, the housekeeper collected the empty glass and left the room with an almost imperceptible smile on her lips. Something about that smile chilled Lily's blood. There were 4 days left until Robert's trip. Lily knew that time was running out. She needed to act, but she didn't know how. Then, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, while everyone was busy with their tasks, Lily ventured into the mansion's basement. She had never gone down there before. Mrs. Higgins always kept the door locked, but that day, through some oversight or distraction, the door was ajar. The girl descended the wooden steps which creaked under her feet. The air was damp and cold. Shelves, full of old boxes, furniture covered with white sheets, and a smell of mold hung in the air. At the back of the basement, there was a wooden table with a stack of papers. Lily approached, her heart racing. She picked up the first paper. It was an old newspaper clipping, yellowed by time. The headline read, "Construction Site Accident Leaves Engineer in Critical Condition." She continued flipping through. More clippings, old photos, documents. And then she found a death certificate. The name was Franklin Miller. The date, 12 years ago. Lily turned the paper over and found a photo. 3 people smiling. A middle-aged man, a tall woman with dark hair, and a young man. On the back, handwritten, Franklin, Higgins, and Richard. Siblings, united forever. The world seemed to spin around Lily. Mrs. Higgins, Richard, and that man were siblings. And Clara. Lily kept searching until she found another photo. Franklin holding a small girl in his lap. On the back, my niece Clara, my treasure. Everything began to make sense. Franklin Miller had worked for Robert Sterling. Something had happened at the construction site, something that cost Franklin his life. And now, his relatives were in Robert's. house working for him, gaining his trust, all to execute a revenge plan that took years to architect. And the target was George, the son, the heir, the continuation of the Sterling line. Lily felt nauseous. She put everything back as it was and ran up the stairs. She locked herself in her room and tried to organize her thoughts. She needed proof. She needed to tell someone. But who would believe an 11-year-old girl accusing 3 trusted employees of such a plan? There were 3 days left until Robert's trip. Lily barely ate, she barely slept, her mother began to worry, but the girl insisted she was just tired. Constance, always busy, accepted the explanation and went on with her tasks. On Sunday night, Robert gathered all the staff in the living room. It was something unusual. Everyone was tense. "I want to thank you for your work. I know I maintain an absent routine, but I trust each of you here. Mrs. Higgins, Richard, Clara, you have been part of this house for years. And Constance, you have proven to be an excellent addition to the team. I also thank young Lily, who has behaved exemplarily." Lily lowered, her eyes feeling the weight of Mrs. Higgins's gaze upon her. "I will be traveling early tomorrow. I count on all of you to keep everything in order. Beatrice isn't feeling very well, so I ask for special attention to her and little George." "Don't worry, Mr. Sterling. We will take care of everything," said Mrs. Higgins with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After the meeting, Lily saw Richard and Mrs. Higgins exchange a significant look. Clara left the room quickly, as if she couldn't stand being there. There were only a few hours left. Lily knew she needed to be prepared. Whatever they planned to do, she needed to be present. She needed to be alert. She needed to protect George somehow. That night, lying in bed, Lily made a silent promise. She wouldn't let anything happen to that baby. No matter the risk, no matter the fear. She had seen too much. She knew too much. And now she had a responsibility she didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. Dawn brought Robert's departure. Lily watched from the window as he got into the car, and Richard closed the door. The engine started. The gate opened. And the mansion plunged into a heavy silence. Beatrice took her medicine early. Mrs. Higgins stayed longer than usual in her room. When she came out, the patriarch's wife already had her eyes half closed, fighting against the induced sleep. Clara took George from the crib and brought him to the living room. Her hands were visibly shaking. The baby whimpered, sensing the tension. Richard moved through the house, checking doors and windows as if he were sealing all escape routes. And Mrs. Higgins coordinated everything with cold efficiency. Lily watched from a distance, hidden behind doors, pretending to study, pretending not to pay attention. But every fiber of her being was alert. The hours passed slowly. Afternoon fell. Night arrived. Beatrice was sleeping deeply in her room. Constance was in the laundry room, folding sheets. Lily remained in the kitchen, pretending to have a snack. And then, near 10 at night, she heard a muffled sound coming from upstairs, a cut-off cry, a strange noise. Her heart raced. She ran up, trying not to make a noise. As she got close to the baby's room, she saw Clara leaving quickly with George in her arms. The baby was pale. His lips were starting to turn dark. Clara ran down the stairs, her eyes wide with panic. Lily followed her, keeping her distance. Reaching the kitchen, Clara placed George on the marble countertop. The baby didn't move. He didn't cry. Mrs. Higgins appeared immediately, followed by Richard. "What did you do?" Higgins asked with contained urgency. I don't know. He just stopped reacting. I only did what you told me, but—" "Call the ambulance, now." Richard picked up the phone. In a few minutes, paramedics would be there. Lily remained hidden near the pantry, watching everything. Her body trembled. Her mind screamed. She knew. She knew that wasn't an accident. She knew they had done something to George, something that now seemed to have spiraled out of control. The baby was motionless, pale. His lips were dark. And while everyone waited for the ambulance to arrive, Lily made the most difficult decision of her life. It was time to act. The siren of the ambulance cut through the night silence in Greenwich. The sound echoed through the tree-lined streets, awakening the curiosity of neighbors who peered through their windows. In the Sterling mansion, chaos had settled in a contained, almost silent way. as if even despair needed to follow a protocol. Lily remained hidden among the shadows of the pantry, watching the scene unfolding in the kitchen. George remained motionless on the marble counter, his body too small for that cold space. Clara was crying softly, her hands trembling as she stroked the baby's hair. Richard stood rigid as a statue, his eyes fixed on the door. And Mrs. Higgins, with her characteristic efficiency, had already prepared a story for the paramedics. He simply stopped reacting. The nanny found him like this in the crib. We don't know what happened. The lie left her lips with such naturalness that Lily felt a chill. That woman was prepared for everything. She had ready answers. She had a plan for every eventuality. The paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes. There were 2 men and a woman, all dressed in blue, carrying equipment bags and an air of controlled urgency. The woman, who seemed to be the team leader, took command immediately. "When did you notice the change in his condition?" "About 15 minutes ago," Mrs. Higgins replied without hesitation. "The nanny put him to sleep normally, but when she went to check, he was like this." The paramedic began to evaluate George. She checked his airways, breathing, and heartbeat. Her face remained professional, but Lily saw the worry in her eyes. "We need doctors here, now. Call Dr. Henry Barnes and the team at St. Jude's Medical Center. Tell them it's a severe pediatric emergency." Richard picked up the phone again. In 20 minutes, doctors began to arrive. Not 1 or 2, 9 professionals responded to the call, including pediatricians, intensivists, and a neonatal emergency specialist. The house that was once silent was transformed into an improvised medical center. Lily recognized some of them. Dr. Henry Barnes was the family's private pediatrician, a middle-aged man with gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses. Dr. Camille Sanders, a pediatric cardiologist, arrived soon after, bringing a portable defibrillator. Other doctors Lily didn't know entered carrying equipment, medication, and oxygen cylinders. The kitchen became an emergency room. They moved the chairs, cleared the counter, and organized the equipment around George. The lights were turned up to the maximum. The sound of beeping machines began to fill the space. Lily watched everything, her heart hammering in her chest. She saw when they connected George to the heart monitor. She saw when they inserted an IV line into his tiny arm. She saw when they began administering medication, pure oxygen through a small mask, epinephrine, other medicines whose names she didn't know. The doctors worked in coordinated silence, communicating with technical words and precise gestures. Lily saw the concentration on their faces, the tension in their movements. They were fighting against time. "Oxygen saturation at 70%. It's too low. Increase the flow. Prepare for intubation if he doesn't respond. Heart rate dropping. 50 beats. More epinephrine. Now." Lily wanted to leave. She wanted to run to her room and hide under the covers, but she couldn't move her legs. She was stuck there, an involuntary witness to something no one else seemed to see, because while everyone focused on medical protocols, technology, and machine numbers, Lily saw something different. She saw the baby. She saw George. She saw his lips getting darker and darker. She saw the color of his skin changing from pale to gray. And she saw something more, something none of the doctors seemed to notice, a strange coloration at the back of George's throat. The image awakened an old memory, buried deep in her mind. Lily was 7 years old when a neighbor in her old Bronx neighborhood almost lost her baby son. Everyone thought it was a common respiratory crisis, but the child didn't get better, until a more experienced health worker noticed a dark coloration in the throat and discovered the baby had ingested something toxic. It wasn't an accident. Someone had given the child something disguised as medicine. That image never left Lily's head, and now, looking at George, she saw the same thing, the same coloration, the same pattern. They are treating the wrong thing, Lily thought with growing despair. They are trying to make his heart beat, his lungs breathe, but the problem isn't there. It's in his throat. It's in what he swallowed. But how to say that? Who would believe an 11-year-old girl questioning 9 specialist doctors? Lily looked around. Constance had arrived in the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. She was leaning against the wall, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Beatrice continued to sleep deeply in her room, unaware that her son was fighting for his life. Mrs. Higgins watched everything with an expression Lily couldn't decipher. Was there worry? There? Or was it just a convincing mask? Clara cried discreetly in a corner, avoiding looking at George. Richard remained motionless near the door, like a guardian. The doctors continued working. More medication, more oxygen. They checked reflexes, examined pupils, tried to stimulate reactions. Nothing worked. George didn't move. He didn't cry. He didn't respond. Oxygen saturation isn't rising. It's at 68. Minimal response to stimuli. Reflexes almost absent. Prepare the defibrillator. It could be arrhythmia. Lily felt panic rising within her. They were following all the correct protocols, but George wasn't improving. And every second that passed was 1 second less of life. She looked again at the baby's throat. From where she was, she could only see partially, but the dark coloration was there. She was sure, and if no one did anything, George wouldn't survive. The girl closed her eyes, trying to gather courage. She remembered the words of her father, who had passed away 3 years ago. He always said that doing the right thing was more important than appearing polite, that protecting those we love required courage, even when we were afraid. Lily didn't know George intimately. She had seen the baby only a few times, always from a distance. But that child was innocent. He wasn't to blame for his father's mistakes. He didn't deserve to pay for crimes he didn't commit. And if she did nothing, she would live the rest of her life knowing she could have saved a life and chose silence. It wasn't a choice, it was an obligation. Lily left the pantry, her legs trembling, her heart racing. She walked toward the counter, where George was surrounded by doctors and equipment. Everyone was so concentrated that no one noticed the girl's approach, until she spoke. "Doctor, I think the problem is in his throat." Her voice came out louder than she intended, cutting through the technical silence of the kitchen. Everyone turned, 9 pairs of eyes fixed on her. Constance widened her eyes, surprised and scared. Mrs. Higgins frowned. Clara stopped crying. Richard took a step forward as if to intervene. Dr. Henry looked at Lily with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Child, this is not the time. Please, leave." But Lily didn't move. She had crossed an invisible line. She couldn't go back now. "There's a dark color in there, in his throat. I saw it. I think he swallowed something bad. We've already evaluated the airways. Everything is clear. Now please, let us work." But Lily didn't leave. She took another step forward. "I've seen this before. A baby almost died in my old neighborhood because of this. Everyone thought it was a respiratory crisis, but it was poisoning. The color was the same. Please, just look. Just check." Dr. Henry sighed, clearly impatient. He was about to dismiss the girl again when Dr. Camille, the cardiologist, raised her hand. "Wait, let me see." She took a small flashlight and approached George. She carefully opened. The baby's mouth illuminated the throat and examined it for a few seconds. Her face changed. The casual expression gave way to absolute attention. "Henry, come look at this." The pediatrician approached, frowning. He looked where the doctor was pointing, and then his face went pale. "My God, there is an abnormal coloration here. This is not a standard pattern of common hypoxia. It looks like a chemical reaction." "Intoxication?" "It's possible. We need to perform a gastric lavage immediately and take samples fast." The kitchen entered a new rhythm, more urgent, more focused. The doctors completely changed their approach. They prepared equipment for gastric lavage, collected saliva and stomach content samples, and administered universal antidotes while waiting for the substance to be identified. Lily backed away, trembling from head to toe. Constance ran to her and hugged her tight, whispering words of comfort that the girl could barely hear. Her heart beat so hard it drowned out all other sounds. Mrs. Higgins watched Lily with a frozen gaze. Clara had shrunk even further into the corner. Richard clenched his fists, his jaw tense. The next few minutes were pure agony. The doctors worked frantically, administering treatments, monitoring reactions, adjusting protocols. Lily couldn't take her eyes off George. She saw when his small body began to react. First a slight spasm, then a cough, then a weak but present cry. Oxygen saturation is rising, 72, 75, 80. Heart rate normalizing, 100 beats, 110. He's responding. He's reacting. A collective sigh of relief filled the kitchen. Constance squeezed Lily harder, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Camille allowed herself a quick smile before returning to her concentration. George was crying. It was a weak, tired cry, but it was life. It was a response. It was hope. We need to take him to the hospital now. He needs intensive observation and a complete analysis of the substances. The intoxication may have caused damage we haven't detected yet. The paramedics prepared George for transport. They placed him on a small stretcher, connected him to portable monitors and covered him with thermal blankets. Dr. Camille and Dr. Henry would go along in the ambulance. Before leaving, Dr. Camille approached Lily. She knelt to be at the girl's height and held her hands. "You saved his life, do you know that? If you hadn't spoken up, we wouldn't have seen it. We wouldn't have changed the treatment in time. You were very brave." Lily couldn't answer. She only nodded, her eyes full of tears. The ambulance departed, taking George, Dr. Camille, and Dr. Henry. 2 other doctors stayed behind, collecting evidence and asking questions. The mansion, once a medical battlefield, plunged into a heavy and uncomfortable silence. Constance took Lily to her room, still holding her. She laid her daughter in bed, covered her carefully, and stayed there, stroking her hair until the girl finally relaxed. "You were incredible, my daughter. I don't know how you saw that. I don't know how you had the courage, but God used you today. Used you to save a life." Lily wanted to tell her mother everything. She wanted to talk about the conspiracy, about Franklin Miller, about the revenge plan. But the words wouldn't come out. The exhaustion was immense. The accumulated tension took its toll. In a few minutes, she fell asleep. Constance stayed there, looking at her daughter with a mixture of pride and worry. Something was happening in that house, something she didn't fully understand, but she knew that from that moment on everything would change. Downstairs in the kitchen, Mrs. Higgins, Richard and Clara gathered after the doctors left. The silence between them was thick as fog. "This shouldn't have happened," Higgins said, with a low and controlled voice. "The girl interfered. She saw things she shouldn't have seen," Richard replied. Clara raised her eyes, still red from crying so much. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe we shouldn't have gone this far." Mrs. Higgins stared at her with coldness. "There is no turning back now. What was done, was done. But we need to rethink everything. That girl is a problem. She knows too much. She saw too much." "What are you suggesting?" Richard asked. "Nothing yet, but we need to be careful, very careful." The 3 separated in silence, each carrying the weight of their choices. The plan that had taken years to build had collapsed in a matter of minutes because of an observant girl who dared to speak when all the adults remained blind. Hours later, Robert Sterling received the call in Washington, D.C. He heard the story in shock, immediately interrupted his commitments, and took the first flight back to Connecticut. Throughout the flight, his mind revolved around Dr. Henry's words. Intoxication. Chemical. Substance. Intervention of a child. Nothing made sense. And everything made sense at the same time. When he arrived at the mansion, it was already pre-dawn. He went straight to Beatrice's room. She was still sleeping, deeply sedated. Robert tried to wake her, but she only murmured incomprehensible words and went back to sleep. He went down to the kitchen, where he found Mrs. Higgins preparing coffee. The housekeeper raised her eyes, surprised by the master's early arrival. "Mr. Sterling, we didn't expect you so soon. I need answers, Higgins. What happened here tonight?" Mrs. Higgins began to tell the official version. George had fallen ill for no apparent reason. The doctors were called. The girl noticed something they hadn't seen. The baby was saved and taken to the hospital. Robert listened to her in silence, but something in his eyes showed he wasn't convinced. There were unasked questions, unexpressed suspicions. "I want to talk to the girl, to Lily. Where is she?" "Sleeping, sir. It was a difficult night for everyone." As soon as she wakes up, let me know. I need to thank her personally." Mrs. Higgins nodded, but Robert saw the discomfort on her face. He saw the tension in her shoulders. He saw something he had never noticed before. Mrs. Higgins was nervous. For the first time in all the years she had worked for him, she showed insecurity. Robert went back up to his room, but he couldn't sleep. He stood at the window looking at the garden lit by the streetlights, thinking, calculating, questioning. Something was deeply wrong in that house, and he suspected the truth was much darker than anyone imagined. Meanwhile, at St. Jude's Medical Center, George slept in a pediatric ICU bed surrounded by monitors and intensive care. Laboratory analyses were already beginning to show results. There were traces of a strong sedative substance in his system, not in lethal doses, but enough to cause respiratory arrest in a baby. Dr. Camille examined the results with growing concern. That was no accident. Someone had given that substance to George, purposely. She picked up the phone and called the police. An investigation was about to begin. And in the Greenwich mansion, at the Sterlings, in the depths of secrets kept for years, the truth began to emerge like dammed water that finally breaks through. Lily woke up with the sun rising. She sat on the bed, still dizzy, trying to process everything that had happened. She looked at her own hands, small and trembling, and could hardly believe she had spoken in front of all those doctors, that she had insisted, that she had saved George. She got up slowly and went to the window. Downstairs, she saw a police car parked in front of the mansion. 2 investigators were talking to Mrs. Higgins at the entrance. Richard was being questioned near the garage. Clara sat on a garden bench, her head down. The truth was coming to light. And Lily knew. That was just the beginning. Detective Charles Murphy had more than 20 years of experience with the police. He had seen everything in his career, from crimes of passion to complex corporate fraud. But when he received the call about a possible attempt on a baby's life in a Greenwich mansion, he felt this case would be different. He arrived at the Sterling estate accompanied by his partner, investigator Patricia Owen, a sharp woman with an attentive eye and meticulous methods. Both were received by Robert Sterling, who was visibly shaken, his eyes red from exhaustion and worry. "Mr. Sterling, we need to talk to everyone present in the house during the incident, starting with the employees who had direct contact with the child." Robert nodded and led the investigators to the living room. There, Mrs. Higgins waited, sitting with her usual upright posture, but there was something different in her eyes, a contained tension, a nervousness she tried to disguise with professional efficiency. Investigator Patricia began with direct questions. What was George's routine? Who took care of him? What medications did he receive? Was there any change in the days prior to the incident? Mrs. Higgins answered everything with calculated precision. Her voice remained firm, her hands didn't shake, but Patricia noticed the small hesitations, the almost imperceptible pauses before certain answers. Something was being omitted. Something was being hidden. Richard was the next to be questioned. He sat in the same chair Higgins had occupied, maintaining the same rigid posture, the same neutral tone. But when Patricia asked about his relationship with the Sterling family, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was enough. "How long have you worked here, Mr. Richard?" 7 years. "And before that?" "I worked at other residences, always as a driver." "Any prior connection to the Sterling family, to Mr. Robert specifically?" "No, none." A lie. Patricia knew when someone was lying, and Richard was lying. Clara was the last of the 3 to be interrogated. When she entered the room, her eyes were swollen from crying so much. Her hands were visibly shaking. She sat on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. The questions began gently. Patricia used a maternal, understanding tone. She knew Clara was the weak link in the chain, the one about to break. "It must have been very scary for you, Clara, finding the baby like that." Clara nodded, unable to speak. "Were you alone with him?" Yes. I was changing his diaper before putting him to sleep." "And when did you notice something was wrong?" He became very quiet, very pale. "I called Mrs. Higgins immediately." Did you give him anything before? Medicine? Water? Anything? Clara opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. Her hands gripped the fabric of her skirt. Her eyes filled with tears again. No, I didn't give him anything. Another lie, more obvious than the previous one. Patricia exchanged a look with Detective Charles. Both knew they needed more information before pressing further. They decided to change strategy. We'd like to speak with the girl who identified the problem. Lily, right? Robert, who accompanied all the interrogations, nodded. I'll go get her. Minutes later, Lily entered the room accompanied by her mother, Constance. The girl seemed small and scared, but her eyes showed sharp intelligence. She observed everything. She recorded every detail. Patricia smiled at her, trying to make her comfortable. Hi, Lily. My name is Patricia. I'm an investigator. You're not in trouble, okay? We just want to better understand what you saw last night. Lily looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Then she began to speak. Her voice came out low at first, but it gained strength as the story progressed. She told about the dark coloration in George's throat, about the memory of the baby in her old neighborhood, about the courage she had to gather to speak in front of all those doctors. She spoke with sincerity and clarity, without embellishment or dramatization. Patricia listened with growing attention. There was something in the girl's narrative that sounded too true to be ignored. And there was something more, a sharp perception, a rare sensitivity. Lily, do you spend a lot of time observing the people in this house? The girl hesitated. She looked at her mother again. Sometimes I like to observe. And did you notice anything strange in the days before the incident? Anything that caught your attention? It was the opening Lily was waiting for, the opportunity to tell what she had seen, what she had heard, what she had discovered. But at the same time, she felt fear. Fear of not being believed. Fear of putting her mother in danger. Fear of the consequences. Constance noticed her daughter's hesitation and stepped closer, holding her hand. You can speak, my daughter. Tell the truth. It is always the right path. Lily took a deep breath, and then she began to tell. About the conversations she had overheard while hidden, about the tension between the 3 employees, about the phrase that had chilled her blood. This has been planned for years. About her exploration in the basement and the discoveries about Franklin Miller. The room fell into absolute silence. Robert turned visibly pale. Detective Charles leaned forward. Patricia grabbed her pen and began taking rapid notes. Lily, you said you found documents in the basement, newspaper clippings about an accident. Can you show us where? The girl nodded. Everyone went down to the basement. Lily led the way to the wooden table at the back, but when they got there, the table was empty. Completely empty. No paper, no photo, no document. Lily felt the ground slip from under her feet. It was all here, I swear. There were newspaper clippings, photos, documents. It was all here. Patricia examined the table, looking for any trace. She found only a thin layer of dust that had been recently disturbed. Someone had removed everything, and recently. I believe you, Lily. Someone cleared the evidence, but that doesn't mean we can't find it another way. They returned to the living room. Robert was visibly shaken. He sat heavily in an armchair, his hands covering his face. Franklin Miller, he murmured. After all these years, he still haunts me. Detective Charles approached. Mr. Sterling, do you know that name? Robert raised his eyes, tired and full of pain. I do. Franklin worked for me 12 years ago. He was an engineer at one of my construction sites. A competent man, dedicated. But there was an accident. A structural failure that wasn't identified in time. Franklin was on site when it happened. He was seriously injured. He spent months in the hospital, but he didn't make it. And what was your involvement in the accident? Robert closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with guilt. The project was behind schedule. I pressured the team to speed up the deadlines. I cut some safety procedures that I considered excessive. I ignored risk reports. I wanted to deliver the project on time so as not to lose the contract. Franklin warned about the dangers. He asked for more time, more resources. I refused, and he paid with his own life because of my ambition. Was there an investigation at the time? There was. But I had competent lawyers, money to make settlements, influence to hush up the case. Officially, it was recorded as a workplace accident without the employer's direct responsibility. Franklin's family received a settlement and the case was closed. But I knew the truth. I always knew. Patricia took notes as she listened. Pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Did Franklin Miller have a family? He did. 2 siblings, Higgins and Richard, and a niece, Clara. I remember them at the funeral. The hatred in their eyes, the pain, the anger. After that, I never saw them again. Until now, I realize, they were here the whole time, in my house, waiting for the right moment. Robert stood up, walking to the window. His voice came out lower, heavier. Higgins appeared 7 years ago with excellent references. I hired her without suspicion. Then Richard, also with an impeccable resume. And Clara 3 years ago, right when Beatrice got pregnant. All at strategic moments, all positioning themselves. I was a fool, an arrogant fool who thought the past could be buried with money and influence. Detective Charles crossed his arms. We're going to need to bring all 3 in for formal interrogation, and we'll need the full results of the baby's toxicological analysis. If what we suspect is confirmed, we're talking about attempted murder. At that moment, Mrs. Higgins entered the room. She must have heard part of the conversation, because her face was paler than usual. Mr. Sterling, I need to speak with you in private. Anything you have to say can be said. In front of the investigators, Higgins. The housekeeper looked around, seeing all eyes fixed on her. Her mask of efficiency finally began to crack. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Her eyes filled with tears held back for years. Fine. I'll tell everything. But first, you need to understand one thing. We didn't want it to come to this. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Patricia picked up the recorder. Are you willing to make a formal confession? Mrs. Higgins nodded, exhausted. She sat in the chair Lily had occupied minutes before. Her hands, always so steady, trembled slightly. Franklin was my older brother, our hero, our protector. When our parents passed away, he took responsibility for me and Richard. He worked hard to give us an education, opportunities. He loved our younger brother's daughter, Clara, as if she were his own. When he got the job at Mr. Sterling's company, he was so happy. Finally, he would be able to achieve all his dreams. Her voice failed. She cleared her throat before continuing. But then came the accident. Franklin called us that morning worried. He said there were problems with the structure, that he needed more time to do checks, that Mr. Sterling was pressuring too much. He asked to talk more later. It was the last time I heard his voice without pain. Tears finally streamed down her face. He spent months in the hospital, months of agony. We tried everything, but his body was too damaged. And the worst was seeing the pain in his eyes, not just physical. It was the pain of knowing it could have been avoided, that his life was sacrificed for the greed of someone who didn't even have the decency to visit him once in the hospital. Robert lowered his head, ashamed. When Franklin left, something died in us too. Richard became bitter. Clara lost the father who raised her, and I transformed into someone I no longer recognize. We fed the anger. We planned the revenge. We spent years preparing. We changed our names on work documents, used false references, built identities that hid our connection to Franklin. She looked at Robert with a mixture of hatred and sadness. We wanted you to feel the same pain you made us feel. We wanted to take from you what you loved most, just as you took from us. It seemed fair. It seemed right. And George was the target. Higgins nodded, the shame evident on her face. We waited for the right moment. When he was born, we began to plan the final details. I took care of Beatrice, keeping her sedated enough not to interfere. Clara had direct access to the baby. Richard ensured nothing happened outside the plan. Everything was aligned. Until that girl started observing too much, seeing too much. Lily felt a chill at hearing her name mentioned indirectly. On the night of the incident, we gave George a sedative substance. It wasn't meant to be lethal, just strong enough to cause a severe medical emergency. We wanted it to look natural, a sudden syndrome, something inevitable. But the girl saw, and everything collapsed. Mrs. Higgins covered her face with her hands. When I saw the doctors saving George, I felt relief. For the first time in 12 years, I felt that maybe we were wrong, that our revenge wouldn't bring Franklin back, that we were only perpetuating the cycle of pain. The silence that followed was deep. Patricia turned off the recorder. Detective Charles stood up. "Irene Higgins, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy. Richard Miller and Clara Miller will also be detained. You have the right to an attorney." Higgins didn't resist. She allowed herself to be handcuffed with an expression of total exhaustion. Richard and Clara were brought in and received the same charge. Clara cried copiously. Richard kept his face impassive, but his eyes showed defeat. When the three were taken away by the police, the mansion plunged into a strange silence. Robert remained in the room, sitting, processing everything he had just heard. Constance hugged Lily, whispering words of comfort. The girl was in shock, still trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she had witnessed. Hours later, Robert went to the hospital to visit George. The baby was stable, recovering well under intensive care. Robert stood before the crib, looking at his son with tears in his eyes. Dr. Camille approached. "He's going to be fine. Thanks to the girl, the treatment was fast enough to avoid permanent damage. I need to talk to her, to Lily. I need to thank her, and I need to do much more." When Robert returned to the mansion, it was already night. He asked Constance and Lily to meet him in the library. Both arrived nervous, unsure of what to expect. Robert received them with a humility he had never shown before. He knelt before Lily, staying at her height. "You saved my son, not just last night, but long before that. You observed, you questioned, you had courage when I had only blindness. There are not enough words to thank you, but I will try to spend the rest of my life living up to the gift you gave me." Lily didn't know what to say. She just nodded, her eyes moist. Robert stood up and looked at Constance. "You and your daughter are no longer employees of this house. You are family. You will have a home here for as long as you wish, and Lily will have all the opportunities that her talent and courage deserve." Constance began to protest, but Robert raised his hand. "It's not charity, it's recognition, it's gratitude, and it's also a way to start fixing the mistakes I've made, because Lily showed me something I had forgotten, that a life is worth more than any ambition, that protecting those we love requires courage, not money, and that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unlikely voices." In the days that followed, the story hit the news. The attempt on George, the revenge conspiracy, the heroism of an 11-year-old girl. The media speculated, created narratives, sought culprits and heroes. But inside the Sterling mansion, something deeper was happening. Robert began to reopen Franklin Miller's case, not to defend himself, but to finally take responsibility. He hired independent investigators, gathered evidence, and confronted his own guilt. Weeks later, he called a press conference. Before cameras and journalists, he publicly confessed his negligence. He admitted to prioritizing profit over safety. He recognized that Franklin Miller had paid with his life for his, Robert's, mistakes. "I announce today the creation of the Franklin Miller Foundation, dedicated to workplace safety and support for families who have lost loved ones in labor accidents. Furthermore, I am stepping down from direct control of my company, transferring management to an independent board that will always prioritize worker safety above deadlines and profits." It was a scandal. Shareholders protested, partners questioned. But Robert didn't back down. Beatrice, finally free from excessive medication, began her recovery. With proper medical monitoring and therapy, she slowly reconnected with herself and with George. For the first time in years, she smiled genuinely, and Lily returned to her routine, but everything had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was respected. She was heard. But more importantly, she had learned that her voice had power. That observing was important, but acting was essential. One afternoon, while taking care of George in the garden, the baby smiled at her. A wide, innocent smile, full of life. Lily smiled back, feeling peace for the first time since she had arrived at that mansion. She had saved a life, but more than that, she had helped break a cycle of hatred that could have destroyed many others. 6 months had passed since that night that changed everything. The Sterling mansion in Greenwich looked the same on the outside, with its high gates and white walls, but inside it was a completely different place. The heavy silence had given way to sounds of life, laughter, conversations, the occasional cry of George, now 1 year old, demanding attention with the characteristic vitality of healthy babies. Lily woke up that Saturday morning with the sun coming through the window of what was now officially her room. No longer the maid's room in the back, but a large space on the second floor with a view of the garden, a shelf full of books and a desk where she spent hours studying and drawing. She still got startled sometimes, thinking it was all a dream she would wake from at any moment. She went down to the kitchen, where she found her mother, Constance, preparing breakfast, but it was no longer the service kitchen, it was the main kitchen, spacious and bright, where the whole family gathered for meals. Constance no longer wore a uniform. She wore comfortable, casual clothes, and her face displayed a tranquility Lily hadn't seen in years. "Good morning, my daughter. Did you sleep well?" "I did, Mum. I dreamed about the new school." Constance smiled, serving fresh orange juice. "Are you nervous about classes starting next week?" "A little, but also excited." The elite private school Lily would begin attending was one of the best in Connecticut. Robert had insisted, not as payment or obligation, but as recognition of the potential he saw in the girl. Lily had resisted at first, feeling uncomfortable with so much change, but Constance had encouraged her to accept. "You deserve it, Lily. You deserve every opportunity. Your father would be so proud." At the mention of her late father, both were silent for a moment, honoring his memory. Then Constance smiled again, pushing away the sadness. "Beatrice asked for you to help her with George today. She wants to take him to the park and would like your company." Lily nodded, excited. Her relationship with Beatrice had completely transformed. The distant and medicated woman of the past had given way to a present and affectionate mother, who had discovered in motherhood a strength she didn't know she had. Beatrice's recovery had been long and difficult, involving intensive therapy, psychiatric support, and much love from the family. But she was winning. Day after day. Lily finished breakfast and went up to get ready. Passing through the hallway, she saw Robert leaving the office with a stack of documents. He had stopped traveling so much. He spent more time at home, reorganizing not only his company, but his priorities. "Good morning, Lily. Going to the park with Beatrice and George?" "Yes, I am." "Great. Later I want to show you something. Something important." Lily nodded curiously and went to her room. While changing clothes, she thought about how much everything had changed. Justice had taken its course with Higgins, Richard, and Clara. The three had been tried and convicted, but Robert had done something unexpected. Instead of seeking the maximum penalty, he had asked the judge for clemency. He argued that true justice was not in punishing them further, but in breaking the cycle of pain he himself had started. The three received alternative sentences: community service, mandatory therapy, and psychological monitoring to deal with the grief and anger accumulated for years. Initially, they rejected any approach from Robert, but over time, especially Clara, they began to accept help. Lily thought about them frequently, especially Clara, who had been the most fragile of the trio. She knew the nanny never really wanted to hurt George. She had been dragged by a pain she didn't know how to process, and by a family loyalty that had turned into a prison. Later at the park, Lily pushed George's stroller while Beatrice walked alongside. The baby babbled cheerful sounds, pointing at birds, trees, and everything that caught his attention. His blue eyes shone with curiosity, without any trace of the trauma that had almost cost him his life. Beatrice watched her son with an almost palpable love. Then she turned her eyes to Lily with infinite gratitude. "You know he wouldn't be here without you, right? Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and go to the crib just to see him breathing. And every time I thank God for putting you in our lives." Lily didn't know how to answer those words. She felt uncomfortable being treated as a heroine. She had only done what seemed right, what anyone should do. I was just in the right place at the right time. No, Lily, you were attentive, you were brave. That is much rarer than you imagine. Most people see but choose not to perceive. You chose to see, and more importantly, you chose to act. They sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. George played with a small plush toy, completely oblivious to the depth of the conversation around him. "Beatrice, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you take so many pills? Why were you always so distant?" Beatrice sighed, looking at the horizon. Depression, anxiety, fear. I had been fighting it for years, but I never sought real help. Robert didn't realize it either. He was always so busy, so focused on business, that our relationship became superficial. When I got pregnant, I was terrified. I didn't think I'd be a good mother. Mrs. Higgins noticed my fragility, and instead of helping me, took advantage of it. She increased the doses of my medications, keeping me in a state of constant torpor. I was barely present in my own life. She wiped away a tear that escaped. But now I'm in proper treatment. I have a wonderful therapist. Robert is present. And I have George. I have you and Constance too. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I belong somewhere, that I have a real family. Lily held Beatrice's hand in a simple gesture of affection. They didn't need more words. When they returned home, Robert was waiting in the library. He motioned for Lily to enter and closed the door behind her. There was a seriousness on his face that made the girl slightly nervous. "Sit here, Lily. I need to talk to you about something important." Lily sat in one of the leather armchairs. Robert picked up a thick envelope from the table and handed it to her. "What is this?" "Open it." Lily opened the envelope carefully. Inside were legal documents, some papers with official stamps, and a handwritten letter. She began to read, but the legal words were too complex. Robert noticed her confusion and explained, "They are documents for an educational trust I created in your name. It will guarantee your studies through university, including graduate school if you want. There is also a savings account for your future. And when you turn 18, if you want to study abroad, everything will be covered." Lily's eyes widened. "But Mr. Sterling, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not too much. In fact, it's still little compared to what you did. And I'm not doing this out of obligation or guilt. I'm doing it because I believe in your potential. You have a sharp intelligence, a rare perception, and admirable courage. You're going to do great things in life, Lily. And I want to make sure you have all the necessary tools." Lily felt tears starting to form. She tried to hold them back, but it was useless. "I didn't save George expecting a reward. I know, that's exactly why you deserve it. True heroes never do things expecting recognition. They do them because it's right, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be recognized." Robert approached and placed his hand on Lily's shoulder. "There's one more thing. This afternoon we'll have visitors, people you know." Lily wiped the tears, curious. "Who?" "You'll see." At 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Lily was in the garden with George when she heard voices coming from the entrance. She recognized one of them immediately. Her heart accelerated. When she entered the living room, she saw 3 people she didn't expect to see again. Higgins, Richard, and Clara. They were different, thinner, wearing simple clothes, their faces marked by difficult experiences, but also by something new, a kind of reluctant peace. Lily stopped at the door, uncertain. Constance appeared at her side, also surprised. Robert stood up, making formal introductions, though everyone already knew each other. "Higgins, Richard, and Clara asked to come here today. They want to talk to you. I said I would only allow it if Lily and Constance agreed." Lily looked at her mother, who nodded slightly. Then she looked at the 3 visitors and nodded too. Clara was the first to speak. Her voice came out trembling, laden with emotion. "Lily, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about what we almost did, what I almost took from this world, an innocent baby. Because of a pain we turned into hatred." She wiped away tears that flowed freely. "You saved me too that night. You saved George from my weakness. And you saved me from becoming someone I could never forgive. I'm in therapy now, working at a children's shelter, trying to turn my pain into something useful. It doesn't fix what I did, but it's a start." Richard spoke next, his voice still controlled but less cold than before. "I spent 12 years feeding anger, convincing myself that revenge was justice. But you, a child, showed more courage and wisdom than I had in my entire adult life. Thank you for preventing us from crossing a line from which there would be no return." Higgins was the last. The woman who had commanded everything with an iron fist now seemed small and vulnerable. "I was the oldest. I should have been wiser. I should have guided my brother and my niece on the path of healing, not revenge. But I chose hatred, and I almost destroyed not just George, but all of us. Lily, you gave us something we didn't deserve, a chance to start over, to choose differently." The silence that followed was heavy. Lily felt so many conflicting emotions she could barely process them. Anger still existed, yes. Fear, too. But there was something more. Compassion. The understanding that hurt people hurt other people. And that, breaking that cycle required something greater than justice. It required mercy. Robert stepped to the center of the room. The Franklin Miller Foundation is not just about workplace safety. It's about honoring the memory of a good man by turning pain into hope. Higgins, Richard, and Clara have agreed to work at the foundation. They are going to help ensure that no other family goes through what they went through, that no other worker is sacrificed for ambition. He looked at the three. It's not instant redemption, it doesn't erase the past, but it's a path, and everyone deserves the chance to walk it. Lily surprised everyone, including herself, when she approached Clara. The former nanny shrank back as if expecting rejection, but Lily simply said, "George is doing well. He's healthy and happy. I thought you'd like to know." Clara sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Higgins and Richard were also moved. Robert and Beatrice exchanged looks of approval. And Constance, seeing her daughter's maturity, felt her chest swell with pride. The visit ended shortly after. The three said goodbye, promising to honor the second chance they were receiving. When they left, the mansion returned to its new normal. A normal based on truth, not secrets. On healing, not pain. That night during dinner, the whole family gathered. Robert and Beatrice sat together, with George in his high chair between them, Constance and Lily on the other side of the table. Not as employees and masters, but as a family built not by blood, but by choice and gratitude. Robert raised his glass of juice. A toast to new beginnings, to second chances, and to the brave girl who taught us that doing the right thing is always more important than doing the easy thing. Everyone raised their glasses. George clapped his little hands on the tray, not understanding but happy to be included. Beatrice added, "And to families we choose to build. Sometimes blood isn't enough. Sometimes love is." Constance, with tears in her eyes, only whispered, "Amen." The months that followed brought more changes. Lily started at the new school and, after an initial period of adaptation, flourished. She discovered a love for science, especially medicine. She began to dream of becoming a doctor, inspired by the professionals who saved George and by her own experience of identifying a problem others didn't see. The Franklin Miller Foundation gained national recognition. Robert used his influence not to cover up mistakes, but to promote real changes in labor laws. Higgins, Richard, and Clara became spokespeople, sharing their story as a warning about the dangers of letting pain turn into hatred. Beatrice returned to painting, a passion she had abandoned years before. Her colorful canvases decorated the house, bringing life and beauty to every room. And George grew up surrounded by love, completely oblivious to how close he had been to not being there. On a Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the attempt on George, Lily was in the garden drawing when Robert approached. "Can I sit?" "Sure." He sat on the bench beside her, watching the drawing. It was a portrait of George laughing. "You have talent." "Thank you." Robert was silent for a moment before speaking. "You know, Lily, I spent my whole life thinking success was measured in money and power. I built an empire, but I almost lost a family. It took me years to understand that the most important things cannot be bought or conquered. They need to be cultivated with time, with attention, with love. He looked at the mansion where Beatrice was playing with George. You taught me that. An 11-year-old girl taught me what decades of business couldn't, and I will be eternally grateful. Lily smiled, returning to her drawing. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. Robert laughed, recognizing the wisdom in those words. True. And do you know what the best part of all this is? What? That George is going to grow up in a home where love is more important than appearances, where truth is more valuable than secrets, and where courage is recognized no matter where it comes from. That is, the greatest gift we could give him. That night, Lily lay in bed thinking about everything that had changed since she had walked through the mansion gates for the first time. She had come with fear and uncertainty, expecting only a safe place to live. She found a family. She found purpose. She found her own strength. She remembered her late father's words. Do the right thing, even when you're afraid. She had honored his teachings, and in doing so, she had saved not just one life, but several. She saved George. She saved Higgins, Richard, and Clara from becoming what they most feared. She saved Robert and Beatrice from a life of regret, and in a way she saved herself. George grew up strong and healthy. At 5 years old, he had no memory of that terrible night, but he carried within him the mark of having been loved so deeply that people changed their entire lives to protect him. Lily remained in his life as an older sister, protector, and friend. And when he asked why she was so special to everyone, Beatrice always replied the same way. Because she taught us how to see, and after we learned how to see, we were never the same. Years later, when Lily entered medical school, Robert and Beatrice were in the front row of the ceremony. Constance cried with pride, and George, now 9 years old, held a sign he had made himself. My sister is going to save the world. And maybe in a way she already had, because she had saved a life. She had broken a cycle of hatred, and she had shown that courage has no age, that wisdom has no size, and that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it seems impossible. The mansion in Greenwich remained standing, its white walls witnesses to profound transformations. Where there were once secrets, there was now truth. Where there was once silence, there was now laughter. Where there was once pain, there was now healing. And all because an 11-year-old girl dared to see what no one else saw, dared to speak when everyone else remained silent, dared to believe that a life was worth fighting for, even if it was just that of a child she barely knew. Lily never considered herself a heroine. She saw herself only as someone who did what had to be done. But for George, she would always be the person who gave him the most precious gift, life itself. And for all who had their lives touched by her courage, she would always be the reminder that kindness, wisdom, and bravery can come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, just sometimes, a single small voice is all the world needs to change.